Today is International Pregnancy and Infant Loss Day. It's a day that is set to memorialise and honour those families right around the world who have lost a child to either to miscarriage, stillbirth or infant death. Now, a group of parents and corporate leaders are joining Stillbirth Foundation Australia in a campaign to ensure that company-provided paid parental leave scheme offers leaves to parents of stillborn babies. Well, my first guests tonight are two of those who are leading the push: Andrew McBride, the father of stillborn baby Hope, and Diane Smith-Gander, a corporate board director and former head of Chief Executive Women. I want to welcome both of them to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And as we begin, I should acknowledge I am the patron of Stillbirth Foundation Australia, and also acknowledge that Sky News does explicitly include stillbirth in its paid parental leave policy. But I want to speak to you both about this campaign. Diane, what do we know about companies, how they currently handle the situation of paid parental leave when parents have a stillborn child?
Well, Kristina, sadly, it is a little bit hit and miss. And this is one area where the government is really leading the private sector, because the Paid Parental Leave Act does have explicit provisions which cover stillbirth, and public sector employees also generally have policies that they can go to which explicitly covers stillbirth. But in the private sector, I don't think this is meant to intentionally exclude this particular circumstance, but it feels a little neglected. It's almost as if it, at this point, hasn't quite yet been thought about. So, generally, we're finding that companies don't have an explicit statement around stillbirth.
Let me pick up on that point you've just made about it doesn't seem as if companies are looking to exclude. Is it often the case that families have to ask at this time when they have a stillborn child, they have to go negotiate leave with a manager?
Yes, Kristina, I think that is sadly what is happening. And of course, if you think about the trauma of this sort of event, it's just not the time when you want to have to be in there advocating for yourself in this way. What you would really like is it just to be already automatically there, and a circumstance that's acknowledged as one that is just like parental leave.
Andrew, your daughter, Hope, was stillborn. If you can you describe for us what your family needed in the days and weeks following Hope's birth?
Well, primarily, Kristina, what we needed was emotional support. So we needed that network and family of friends that could help us through what is really simply an awful period. I mean, there's just no two ways about that. We were fortunate in that my wife and I, were working for the government here in Canberra. So we did have access to paid parental leave. Both of our employers gave us time off to grieve, to arrange funerals, the funeral for baby Hope, and to really help us pull it together and try and just deal with the fact that our first daughter, who was so much wanted, was no longer with us. Now, we realised that we were actually fairly fortunate in that position because about a year after we lost Hope, we ran into a mother at the cemetery where Hope is buried, and she had to go back to work because she couldn't financially afford not to. And that encounter just really, really stuck with me, particularly when I joined the private sector, when I moved on from government. So that's when I kind of looked into what was happening in the private sector with paid parental leave. And I discovered that it was actually quite ambiguous in the policies of the companies that I was working for. So it was, I feel, really important to raise awareness of this issue, and this is why we've started this advocacy campaign.
Andrew, if I can stay with you for a moment, some people, not unkindly, but just as a matter of fact, may say, well, Is paid parental leave the right kind of leave after a stillbirth? Isn't paid parental leave meant to be for caring for a baby? Is this the right type of leave that parents should seek in this circumstance?
I think it's true that lots of company policies cast in that caregiving aspect, and that's why they don't really consider stillbirth. But we're parents. Ultimately, it's not baby's leave. We gave birth. My wife had to recover physically from the birth. Particularly if there was a caesarean section involved, which was not the case for my wife in this instance, but for a lot of stillbirths, I'm sure there are caesarean sections. So it's also about the physical recovery, particularly for the mother. But just the emotional recovery as well. There was a study conducted last year by the Stillbirth Foundation and PwC where they came up with economic consequences of stillbirth. And one of those was presenteeism, where your employee turns up to work and they're literally they're there in body, but they're not there in mind. And productivity is just way down. So I think it is the right leave. It is such a difficult situation. And it also just acknowledges that we're parents. We just don't have our child with us.
Diane, some people listening to this might say, surely there'll be a financial impact on companies if they extend this leave to parents of stillborn babies. Have you considered that in this campaign?
Look, the reason that employers provide all sorts of leave to support working parents is because they know that it's cheaper in the long run to keep a good employee than it is to have someone who has a career break, loses productivity in a way that's counterproductive. And so they see the long-term big picture. If you think about it from the short-term perspective, the company will already have budgeted for that particular period of parental leave. And so within the context of the budget period, there should be no impact at all.
And Andrew, what about the financial pressures that a family might face after stillbirth? I'm sure you can reflect on your own experience, but indeed, families often would have been factoring in that they were about to receive paid parental leave, anticipating the birth of their child.
Absolutely. No one plans for stillbirth. You're planning for birth. You're planning to have a live baby. You're planning to have your finances in order so that you've taken maternity leave at half pay so you can extend your time with your child and all of those factors. When you have a stillbirth, you've got the unexpected costs of funerals, potential testing. Baby Hope was a genetic disorder, so thankfully there was no need to do any kind of autopsy or anything like that. But we still had to go through genetic testing to make sure that we could have babies in the future, because Hope was our first. And so by having that financial support, the thought of that, having that potentially ripped out from beneath you during such a traumatic period, and as Diane said, it doesn't effectively add to the bottom line of the company. They would have been factoring in that cost anyway had it been a live birth. So yeah, there are definitely additional financial pressures, but I really think the main reason for doing this is acknowledging that parents of stillbirths, stillborn children are parents, and helping them go through that really difficult period.
Now, Diane, you are also the aunt of a stillborn baby Robert. Can you give us a sense of how common stillbirth is in Australia, how it affects not just the parents but indeed the wider family and community?
Yes, every day in Australia there are 6 stillbirths 1 in 135 births. I was speaking to my sister-in-law Fiona today, and she was reminding me that about 20% of pregnancies in Australia do have some sort of unusual termination and issue. And when you sit down with a group of women and you talk through, we had a small group the other day, 8 women, 6 of us had in some way very close to our family been touched by this issue. 2 people had stillborn siblings, 2 were mothers of stillborn children, and then there was myself and another woman who had a niece and a nephew. So it is way more common than I think we understand, which is why it's so important that these explicit policies are put in place to handle what is a very complex and highly emotionally charged situation for families.
And some people might also be listening to this, Diane, and saying, well, you know, are we really just getting, dicing up different types of leave? You know, we have carers leave now. We are you know, some companies are bringing in domestic violence leave. You know, there is this just another form of leave that you're trying to create?
I think the best way to handle these complex and emotionally charged issues is to have these very explicit, bespoke policies, so there is absolutely no question at the time. It's going to be by far the best way to develop good long-term relationships with your employees. You know, I'm rather struck by Sweden, you know, 6-hour working days. In the US, they don't provide public holidays. There's just a lump of days that you can take at times that suit you. But I think this is one area where we shouldn't be going in that direction. We should just be getting more explicit and recognising these circumstances will touch our employees from time to time. We obviously hope they don't occur, but they are a reality, much better handled by an explicit policy.
So, Andrew, what are you asking companies to do, and how can they get involved or get more information?
It's very straightforward. We're just asking them to review their existing paid parental leave policies and ensuring that paid parental leave is extended in the case of stillbirth. If they want more information, we're doing this in conjunction with the Stillbirth Foundation, so they can reach them on their website. So that they're the best point of contact for this endeavour. We've assembled a really diverse team across the corporate sector to pursue this, and the Stillbirth Foundation are leading the way on this.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank both of you for your generous time and your generous reflection on your own personal experiences. Andrew McBride, father of Hope, Diane Smith-Gander, aunt of Robert, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you, Kristina.